Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you guys how to crochet clothes for your Sunny Angels. I'm going to be showing you how to make top, shorts, a skirt, a dress, and overalls, and you can just go ahead and skip to the timestamp for the item you want to make. Because the clothes are really small, we're going to be using embroidery floss instead of normal yarn. And you can use normal yarn if you'd like, it just won't look as good as the embroidery floss, and I'll show you guys a side by side. The yarn is just, the stitches are a lot bigger, and I feel like the embroidery floss just looks more precise. And then you'll need a really small hook, so I'm using a 1mm hook, and just a pair of scissors. The first item we're going to be making is this really cute ruffle top, and later if you end up making the dress, this will also be the base of the dress as well. So to begin, grab your embroidery floss. I'm going to be using the blue as my main color. And we're going to start by tying a little slip knot on our hook. And using embroidery floss can take a little while to get used to, so don't get frustrated if it's hard to crochet with it at first. And then we're going to basically chain the width around the Sunny Angel's stomach. So we're going to just chain the length that goes all the way around it, and the number of chains will be different for each person because no one crochets with the same exact tension, so your stitches might be bigger or smaller than mine, but I ended up chaining about 23, and I did need to adjust this a couple times just to make sure that it fit well around the Sunny Angel. And here I am just measuring the chains around the Sunny Angel. And you don't want the chains to be too tight because as we add rows, the tension will increase and the top will get smaller, if that makes sense. So you don't want it to fit too tight to begin with. So I recommend making it the length around and then adding a couple more chains. So I only needed about 20 around, and then I added 3 extra chains to make up for the amount that will decrease later. Anyways, the next step is to insert your hook into that first chain and then just do a slip stitch to make a ring. And once you have the ring, I recommend just trying it on the Sunny Angel by just slipping it on from the feet and make sure that it's not too tight. And to start the next round, we're going to chain 1, and this round will just be single crochets all the way around. So go into the next chain and make a single crochet. And I also recommend carrying that little tail behind as you crochet, just so you don't have to weave it in later. And yeah, we're just going to keep putting a single crochet in each chain all the way around. And make sure that your stitches aren't too loose because you don't want any holes in the top when we're done. To finish this round, we're going to slip stitch into that first stitch that we made. So just insert your hook in there and make a slip stitch. And then for the next round, we're going to be doing the same thing. So chain 1, and then single crochet in the next stitch, and keep single crocheting all the way around. And to finish this round, we're going to slip stitch into that first stitch. And then we're going to do one more of this single crochet round. So chain 1, and we're going to single crochet in every stitch all the way around. And once we finish this round, we'll move on to the next part of the top. And once you finish that round, we're going to make the strap of the top. So I'm going to show you guys on this top I've already made. That's the strap right there, and it's going to wrap around the neck of our Sunny Angel. So I'll show you guys how to put it on. So you just slide it up and then put the head back on, and basically we need to chain a length that will wrap all the way around its neck. I ended up chaining 14, but again, just like our starting chain, you may need more or less depending on how big your chains are. And you can go ahead and test it by sliding the top onto your Sunny Angel and just wrapping the chain around the neck to make sure that it fits. Now to connect the strap to the rest of the top, we're going to count 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we're going to slip stitch into this 5th one. Now we can just fasten off, and I recommend trying on the top before you fasten off just to make sure that the strap fits well, and you can adjust the length of the chains and even the stitches in between. And then we can just weave in the end and move on to the ruffles. For the ruffles, I'm going to be using this red color, and we're going to attach the next color at the bottom of the top. So stick your hook through any of the chains at the bottom and pull a loop of the other color through. And then chain one to secure the thread. Now starting the ruffles, we're going to go back into the stitch we just attached the color to. So in the same stitch, make a single crochet. And then we're going to go into the next chain, yarn over, and make a half double crochet. So we're basically going to increase with each stitch in terms of size. So after the half double crochet, yarn over, go into the next chain, and make a double crochet. And now we're going to do everything in reverse. So yarn over and go into the next chain, and then make a half double crochet. And then in the next chain, make a single crochet. And then in the last chain, make a slip stitch. And this will be our smallest stitch. So that is one ruffle, and we're basically just going to repeat this pattern all the way around. To start the next one, you don't need a slip stitch again. You can just start with a single crochet. So single crochet in the next chain, and then half double crochet in the next one, and then double crochet after that. And now we're going to do everything in reverse again. So half double crochet in the next stitch, and then single crochet in the next one, and then finish with a slip stitch in the last chain. And yeah, now you're just going to repeat this ruffle pattern all the way around until you get to the end of the top. If your stitches don't end with like an even number to finish your ruffle, you can kind of just squeeze all the stitches in the last few, if that makes sense. But anyways, once we're done with this round, we're just going to slip stitch into that first stitch we made. And then you can go ahead and fasten off. And then once you weave in the tail, you're done with the top. For the shorts, we're going to start it the same way we started the top, and that's by making a slip stitch on your hook and chaining the length around the Sonny Angel's body. So if you made the top previously, just chain the same length you did then. I ended up chaining 23 in total, but I recommend starting with about 20 and then adjusting it from there because everyone's chains are different sizes. And then you can just wrap it around the Sonny Angel and see if it fits. And once you have the right length, you can slip stitch into that first chain we made at the beginning, and it's going to make a little ring, which will be like the waistband of the shorts. And once you make that ring, I recommend trying it on one more time on the Sonny Angel just to make sure that it's not too tight or too loose. So now that we have this ring, we can start round one. And after you slip stitch, chain one to start the next round, and we're just going to make single crochets all the way around, just like what we did with the top. So go into the first chain and make a single crochet, and make sure to keep the tension pretty tight so there's no holes in the shorts when we're done, and just make one single crochet. And then we're going to go into the next stitch and make another. And again, I recommend carrying the tail with you and crocheting over it. And yeah, the rest of this round is just single crochets all the way around the ring. Once you're done with the single crochets, we're going to slip stitch into that first stitch we made. So just put your hook in that stitch and then make a slip stitch to end the round. And that's the first row of the shorts. So now if you're going to switch colors, I recommend doing it now. I'm going to be making my shorts stripes, but if you want to just have one solid color, you can just skip this part and keep going in that color. So grab your other color if you're switching colors, and you can just kind of make a loop on it and just pull it through on your hook. And then I just recommend cutting the tail of the other color, but don't cut it too short because you don't want it to end up pulling through. But just leave like a little tail and we can keep crocheting over it to cover it. And yeah, now we're just going to keep doing that same round we did. So chain 1 to start the second round, and we're just going to keep single crocheting all the way around. So insert your hook into the next stitch and make a single crochet, and then we're just going to keep going all the way around just like we did in the last row. And once you're done with that round, we're going to slip stitch into that first stitch just like we did in the last round, and chain 1 to start the next one. And we're going to be doing the exact same thing again, and I'm going to be staying in this red color for this row, and then I'll be changing back to blue for the next one. To end the row, slip stitch like usual, and now I'm going to be switching back to the blue color for the rest of the shorts. So I'm just going to grab my blue thread and then just change colors like we did before. And yeah, now we're going to do 2 more rounds of these single crochets and then we can move on. Once you're done with those 2 rounds, we're going to make the inside of the shorts that basically divides the legs. So chain 4, and we're going to slip stitch into the middle of the other side. So just fold your shorts in half and then just count around and slip stitch into the middle stitch on the other side. So mine was the 11th stitch, but yours might be different. Now you can see the shorts kind of coming together, and to finish it off, we're going to just do 1 more round of single crochets all the way around the shorts, and single crochet until you reach the other side where the chain is, and then we're just gonna single crochet over that chain and then all the way around till the end. And once you get to the other end, we can go into each of these chains with a single crochet. So just stick your hook in the first chain and make a single crochet, and then do it all the way across. And we're going to end the shorts with a slip stitch into that first stitch where we started the chains on the other side. And now the last step is just to cut the tail and weave in the end. So the next item we're going to be making is this tutu skirt. And just like with all the other clothing pieces, start by tying a slip knot on your hook and chaining the length it takes to wrap around the Sonny angel. So just like with all my other pieces, I chained 23, but you may need more or less to wrap around the Sonny angel. And once you're done chaining, we're just going to slip stitch into that first chain to make a ring. And just like with the other pieces, I recommend trying it on the Sonny angel before you continue, just to make sure that it fits. And now to start the first row, chain 2, and we're going to make a double crochet in this first stitch that we just slip stitched into. So yarn over and insert your hook and make a double crochet. And then we're going to make one more. So we want a total of 3, and those chains kind of count as our first one. So we're going to yarn over and make our 3rd double crochet. So now we basically have 3, including those chains at the beginning. So now we're going to do this in every stitch. So make sure to carry the tail behind with you and yarn over, insert into the next chain and make a double crochet. And then yarn over again, insert into the same stitch, make a double crochet. And then make a 3rd one in that same stitch. And we're just going to keep going all the way around the skirt and making 3 double crochets in each chain until we get to the end of the row. And here's what the skirt should look like when you're done with row 1. And now we can just slip stitch into that 2nd chain that we made, so just the one at the top. And that's the end of row 1. Now to start round 2, we're going to chain 2 just like we did before and make a double crochet into that slip stitch that we just made. And then we're just going to keep making double crochets all the way around. So go into the next stitch with a double crochet and just keep making double crochets until you get to the end of the row. And after you finish that round, slip stitch into that 2nd chain just like we did in the last round, and then you can just fasten off. Now we're going to be attaching the 2nd color to make the ruffles on the skirt, and we're going to be doing this in the same way that we did the top. So insert your hook into any stitch around the skirt. I just did one a little bit before the tail, and then grab your 2nd color and just pull a loop through that stitch and then chain 1 to secure it. And now we can start making the ruffles. So to make the ruffles, we're going to start by making a single crochet in that same stitch and then yarn over, make a half double crochet in the next one and make sure to carry the tails with you, and then yarn over, make a double crochet in the next one. And so we're basically just making each stitch bigger than the last. And now we're going to do that in reverse. So yarn over and make a half double crochet in the next one, and then make a single crochet in the next one, and then slip stitch in the last one to finish this ruffle. So we're basically going from smallest to biggest stitch and then back to smallest. And we're just going to repeat this all the way around to make the ruffles. So for the next one, you don't need to start with another slip stitch. You can just start with a single crochet. So go into the next stitch with a single crochet and then half double crochet, and then double crochet, and then half double crochet again, and then single crochet, and finish it off with a slip stitch. And yeah, just keep repeating this pattern all the way around to make the ruffles. And when you're nearing the end of the skirt, you might not have enough stitches to make a full ruffle, so I recommend just squeezing in a couple of stitches in each one. So here, for example, I'm starting the next ruffle and I put a single crochet and a half double crochet in the same stitch, and then in the next one I did the double crochet and then another half double crochet, and then in the last one I finished it off with the single crochet and then slip stitched into that first one. So I recommend doing that. If you're left with an uneven amount of stitches, you can kind of just squeeze in one more ruffle. And yeah, once you're done with those, you can just fasten off and weave in the ends, and then you're done with your skirt. To make the overalls, you're going to need to make the shorts first, so I recommend going to the earlier part of this video where the shorts timestamp is and make those first. And once you make the shorts, we're basically just going to be adding to the front of them to make the rest of the overalls. Now to start the overalls, grab the tail of your thread and we're going to insert our hook into one of these stitches on the side, but you want to make sure that you can crochet it across evenly. So start from that middle line of the shorts, and then you can just count 4 stitches off, and you want it to be about even. So I'm just going into that stitch. Now you can pull that tail through the stitch and chain 1 to secure. And now we can start crocheting the front of the overalls. So go into that same stitch that we just put the hook into and make a single crochet. And then go into the next one with the single crochet and keep single crocheting 8 stitches across. Here's what it should look like after you finish the first row. And now we can just chain 1 and turn your work. So now we're working on the back side, and then insert your hook into the first stitch and make a single crochet. And then we're just going to keep making single crochets all the way across, just like in the last row. And after you finish that row, we are going to chain 1 again and turn back to the front side and make another row of 8 single crochets. And after the third round, chain 1 and turn again, and this is going to be our last row of single crochets. So just like usual, single crochet across. Now the final step is to make the neck strap. So from here we can just chain, and it'll be different for each person depending on your tension in your stitches, but I chained about 13 and that was the right measurement for me. And then I just slip stitched into that first stitch to secure it. And before you fasten off, I recommend trying it on your Sonny Angel to make sure that it actually fits. So you can take the head off and then slide the overalls on and stick the head back in to secure the neck strap. And just make sure that it's not too loose or too tight. So this ended up being perfect for me. And once you're done trying it on, you can go back and fasten off. And once you fasten off, weave in the tail. And this part is completely optional, but I tied a bow and hot glued it to the overalls. And I think this just gives like the cutest little touch. So I just tied it with a little piece of white thread and then just hot glued it to the front. And these are the final overalls. And lastly, for the dress, we're going to start off with the base of the top. So go back to the top in this video, but stop before it gets to the neck strap and the ruffle part. So we're just going to have these 3 rows of single crochets basically, and we're just going to keep continuing them. So chain 1 and just start single crocheting all the way around, just like you did with the top. That was our 4th row of single crochets. So now we can just chain 1 and do our 5th row. So basically just do the same thing, single crochet all the way around. And for the 6th row, do the exact same thing, single crochet all the way around. And now this is row 7, and this will be our last round of single crochets. And after you end that row with the slip stitch, we can make the neck strap of the dress. So just like with all the other pieces, you may need more or less chains than me, but I started with 15 and then that was too big, so I ended up with about 13 chains. But yeah, just chain the length it'll take to wrap around your Sonny Angel's neck. And once you chain that, count 6 stitches, including the one we chained from, and then slip stitch into that 6th one. And now I recommend trying it on your Sonny Angel, just like we did with the other ones, just to make sure that it fits. So like I said before, I had to adjust mine because it was a bit too long. But once you have the perfect length, we can fasten off. So just put your hook back into the loop and then grab your scissors. And once you fasten off and weave in that tail, we can move on to the bottom part of the dress. To start the bottom of the dress, insert your hook into any chain at the bottom, it doesn't really matter which one, and take the tail of your thread and just pull it through to make a loop. And then we're going to start with 2 chains. So chain 2 and then yarn over and insert a double crochet in that same stitch we just chained into. And it got a little cut out from the camera, but I was just inserting 2 double crochets in that same stitch. And once you have those done, the chains that we made earlier will basically count as the 3rd one. And now we can go into the next stitch and make 3 double crochets. So 1 and then 2 and the 3rd one. And we're just going to keep making 3 double crochets in each stitch until we get to the end of the round. And once you get to the end of the round, slip stitch into that 2nd chain we made at the top. And now we can move on to the last row, and it'll be just like the skirt. Start with 2 chains and then insert a double crochet in the same stitch that we just chained in. And then we're going to make a double crochet in each stitch all the way around. So yeah, just keep double crocheting in each stitch all the way around until you get to the end. And once you finish the round of double crochets, you can slip stitch into that 2nd chain again. And now we can fasten off. And once you fasten off, just weave in that tail. And then just like with the overalls, completely optional, but I ended up tying a little bow and then I hot glued it to the front of the dress. And yeah, here is the final dress. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you were able to follow along and crochet these clothes. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't, and comment down below if you'd like to see more Sonny Angel clothing tutorials.